The first time I noticed something was off was when I stopped counting days by the calendar and started counting them by the sound of Ryan's truck rumbling up the gravel road. He'd come home from a long-haul trip, boots heavy with mud, drop his bag by the door, kiss the top of my head, and collapse into bed, before I could even say, "How was the road?" 2 days later, he'd vanish again, and I was left with the silence, the kind that settles not just in the house, but in your bones. Our little home sat on the outskirts of Willow Creek, a quiet Midwestern town with porches full of wind chimes and the scent of blackberries thick in the air every July. It should have felt peaceful, but inside those four walls, loneliness spread like spilled syrup, sticky, slow, hard to clean up. I'd talk to my coffee mug just to hear something answer. The phone would ring and I'd ignore it. I didn't need words. I needed presence. Something real. Something warm. Ryan was a trucker. 2 weeks on the road, 2 days home. I made him dinner, ironed his shirts, folded his socks. I tried to be a harbor, but I felt like fog, like something clinging to him, unnoticed and heavy. Then one evening, as he was lacing up his boots, he paused. "You know, maybe I should ask Caleb to come stay for a while. You wouldn't be so alone then." Caleb, his younger brother. College dropout, studied horticulture somewhere downstate. All smiles and calloused hands. A boy with a soul that smelled like mint and sunshine. He showed up on a Wednesday morning, fresh from the bus, carrying a tray of seedlings and smelling like crushed thyme. First thing he did was fix the back gate, then the sink, then the bedroom window that never closed right. And without meaning to, something in me started to fix too. The first time I noticed, it was a Sunday. Hot, still breathless. He was in the backyard, shirt damp with sweat dirt smudged across his jaw, tending the tomatoes. I came out with lemonade, wearing an old cotton robe that barely tied at the waist. He looked up at me through the sunlight and smiled. "Need a hand?" Not like a man offering help. Like a man seeing a person he didn't want to look away from. I didn't answer. Just stood there. And he understood. From that moment, something new lived in the house. We stayed up talking about books, childhood summers, the way cut grass smells after rain. He listened, not with polite nods, but with that still full-body attention that makes you feel like you matter again. Then came the night the storm knocked out the lights. We lit candles, drank tea at the kitchen table. He pulled out a deck of cards. "Ever played Go Fish?" And we laughed like it meant something. I didn't notice the cards. I noticed his hands. When our knees touched under the table, I didn't move mine away. He whispered, "It's okay." I left my leg there. The air between us thickened, slow and warm like soup on the stove. His breath caught when my fingers brushed his. His skin flinched, not from fear but electricity. We didn't kiss, didn't speak. But something undeniable bloomed between candlelight and thunder. The next morning, I wore a dress. Not for him. For me. Floral print, cinched waist, white sandals. I made cappuccino and even the steam felt different. That's when my phone rang. "Claire. You okay?" Ryan's voice. Tired. Suspicious. "I'll be back Friday. We need to talk." The call ended. I turned. Caleb stood by the fridge holding a jar of honey. My dress strap slipped off my shoulder. He saw. He knew. And then he whispered, "So, what now?" I took a breath. "We'll figure it out. As long as we don't go back to where we weren't seen." His eyes softened, and just like that, we both knew a chapter had closed. But neither of us had any idea what the next one would cost. After that stormy night, Caleb never quite felt like a guest again. He started joining me for breakfast, not just toast and coffee, but real meals. He'd sit at the old round table with the chipped edge, the one I used to eat at alone, and devour oatmeal with caramelized apples and cinnamon like it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. "Smells like my grandma's kitchen," he said once, eyes closed. Like summers when I was 10 and didn't know anything about heartbreak. I smiled, but inside something fluttered. I loved watching him eat. Loved how he sank into the couch in old sweatpants, one leg slung over the other, listening as I complained about Mrs. Henderson's noisy lawnmower or told stories about my awkward high school days. I'd find myself thinking of him at night, the way his laughter stuck to the walls long after he left the room. One afternoon, I was cleaning Ryan's old room, dusting out of habit, not nostalgia. I folded his work shirts, neatly stacked his logbooks, sorted his pile of crumpled gas station receipts. That familiar cologne he wore, it used to make me ache. Now it just smelled sterile, like rubbing alcohol. I leaned my forehead against the window pane. Ryan was coming Friday, but for the first time, I wasn't waiting. Caleb had started fixing more than the broken faucet. We changed out the curtains in the bedroom together. He stood on a stool stretching to reach the rod, and I steadied him by the waist. His t-shirt lifted just enough to show smooth skin and a line of soft hair leading down. My breath caught. He turned, saw the way I was looking. "You okay?" he asked gently. I nodded too fast, fled to the kitchen, pulled a frozen fruit compote from the freezer just to feel something cold in my hands. But it didn't help. The air between us thickened. We never touched on purpose, but we hovered in orbit. I wore thinner robes in the morning. He sometimes walked into the hallway wrapped in a towel, claiming he forgot clean clothes. We were playing a game neither of us admitted to, and neither of us wanted to stop. One evening, I wore a gray dress I hadn't touched in years. Fitted, soft, buttoned all the way down. Underneath, I wore sheer skin-toned lingerie light as air. I swept my hair into a loose bun, let two strands fall on purpose, looked at myself in the mirror, and for the first time in forever didn't see a wife. I saw a woman. When I came downstairs, he was reading on the couch. Clean, freshly showered, something earthy and piney clinging to him. He looked up, froze. "Dinner ready?" he asked, voice rough. "Are you hungry?" I whispered. He nodded. But we didn't go to the kitchen. I walked past him slowly. His hand brushed the small of my back, barely a touch, but it felt like lightning. I turned. Our eyes met. Nothing was said. Everything was felt. He reached for my hand, firm, afraid I might vanish, and led me upstairs. But that night, we didn't make love. We just lay beside each other on top of the quilt, fully clothed. His t-shirt, my nightgown. Our bodies didn't touch, but our breaths synchronized like they'd known each other all along. "Do you want me to stay?" he whispered. "You already have," I breathed. Later, I dreamed of a garden that didn't exist, of grapevines and a creaking swing and standing barefoot in a white cotton dress while someone touched my shoulder gently from behind. I woke up with his hand on mine, first tentative, then certain. I didn't move. I placed my other hand over his like a promise. "Yes, I'm here." Something shifted after that night. Not in a loud way. There were no declarations, no breathless confessions. Just a deeper kind of silence, comfortable, charged, like the hush that falls right before the rain. I started falling asleep faster. For years, I'd stared at the ceiling, counting cracks, wondering what was missing. Now, I drifted off with a strange warmth in my chest, like someone had lit a candle inside me. And waking up, it felt soft. Caleb would already be downstairs barefoot in flannel pajama shorts, holding a mug of tea. His hair messy, his eyes steady on me as I padded in, wearing a gray cotton robe tied loose at the waist. "Morning," he'd say, raspy. "Morning," I'd smile. I started brushing my hair less, putting on lip balm but skipping the mascara. Not because I didn't care, because I didn't have to prove anything. Not with him. That morning, I let the edge of my robe fall open just a little. Playful. Harmless. His gaze dropped for a second, then returned to mine. He didn't say anything, but his tea sat untouched for 5 whole minutes. Later in the garden, I wore a sundress with an open back and old rubber boots. I felt like a girl again, legs dusted with dry earth hair in a loose ponytail. Caleb passed me tools, his fingers brushing mine every time, lingering just long enough to be intentional but not obvious. At one point, I sat down in the grass, fanning myself with my sun hat. "You know," I said, glancing sideways, "you probably know me better than your own brother ever did." He stopped raking, looked at me seriously. "I see you," he said. "Didn't take 5 years either." That night we played cards again on the floor. Just like the storm night. Only this time I lost on purpose just to hear him laugh. I let my feet slide into his lap. He didn't flinch. He laid one hand gently on my ankle, his thumb tracing slow, warm circles up my skin. Goosebumps rose instantly. When our eyes met, we didn't blink. I leaned in. He leaned closer. The kiss wasn't fast or desperate. It was slow, careful, like he was memorizing the taste of me, like we had all the time in the world. His hands found my waist, then slipped under the fabric of my dress, stopping at skin. Not moving, just feeling, just being there. It wasn't lust. It was hunger wrapped in reverence. He pulled back, rested his forehead against mine. I whispered, "Are you scared?" "I'm scared of not being with you," he murmured, brushing a curl from my cheek. And that night, under the soft weight of a blanket and moonlight spilling across the rug, we moved together like pages turning. No rush, no noise, just two people finally touching the truth they'd both been tiptoeing around. The message came just after sunrise. 3 words. Coming home early. I stared at the screen. My fingers didn't move. My breath stalled. Downstairs, Caleb was making scrambled eggs, barefoot, shirtless, humming off-key. He looked up when I entered the kitchen, his smile soft, his eyes still sleepy. "You okay?" I nodded. "He's coming tomorrow." He froze. His hand hovered midair over the stove spatula, still dripping. We didn't speak for a moment. The quiet was thick, heavy, sweet like honey that sat too long in the jar. He set the pan aside and turned toward me. "So, what now?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I walked to the window where an old jar of wildflower honey sat, the one we'd opened our first night with candles and cards. I dipped a finger in, tasted it. It didn't taste like before. Not sweet, not warm. Now it carried the sharpness of something unraveling. "You should go," I said finally. "Today." His jaw tightened. "Are you serious? After everything?" I nodded, eyes still on the glass. I don't want him to find out like that. Not through shadows and silences." He stepped closer, not touching me, just close enough that I could feel the heat from his body. "This isn't about him. This is about you. About what you're ready to choose." I turned away. "I'm not choosing him, Caleb. I'm just not ready to break something yet." He exhaled slowly, then reached out, gently lifted my chin. "Then I'll give you time. But if you don't come to me after he's gone, I won't wait forever." I looked into his eyes, tried to find anger. There was none, only sadness. And something more painful, understanding. That evening, he packed quietly. No slammed doors, no drama. He left with a soft kiss on my temple, a whisper, "Find your voice, then follow it." And just like that, he was gone. The next morning, the sound of the truck returned. Louder than I remembered. Sharper. Ryan stepped out in his old faded tee with the company logo. Sunglasses pushed back on his head, sunburn along his arms. He looked the same. But I wasn't. I stood in the doorway in a black cotton nightgown and a knit cardigan, legs shaking beneath the fabric. He kissed my forehead like always, like nothing had changed. "Brought you something," he said, holding up a jar of cherry jam. "From my mom." We sat at the table later like every other return. Soup steaming, napkins folded, Small talk. "You're warm lately," he said, half laughing. "You sick or something?" I looked at him. "No. I think I'm just living." He didn't ask what I meant, or maybe he didn't want to. That night, I lay beside him in bed, his back turned, soft snore in the dark. I stared at the ceiling, wondering where Caleb was. If he was sleeping, if he missed me, if he knew. At 2 a.m., I reached into the bottom drawer and pulled out the thin nightgown I wore when I first fell asleep next to Caleb. Pressed it to my face. The scent was fading, but it was still there, and I cried without sound. The days after Caleb left passed slowly, thicker than usual, heavier. Ryan tried to return to our routines. He fixed the fence in the backyard, the one Caleb had already mended weeks ago. "Someone worked on this," he muttered, squinting. "Was it you?" "Yeah, I lied too fast. Watched a video. Figured it out." He paused, then nodded unconvinced. At dinner, he was quieter than usual, picked at his food, drank more than usual, too. I could feel it. His suspicion sat in the corners of the room like dust, floating, waiting to be disturbed, and still I said nothing. I folded laundry, swept the porch, pretended like I hadn't forgotten how to breathe when Caleb touched my wrist that last morning. Pretended I hadn't memorized the curve of his smile or the way he held silence with gentleness instead of avoiding it. I was tired. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes, the kind that comes from lying to yourself. One Friday night, I walked in and saw Ryan holding my phone by the window. His face pale, brow furrowed. "Who's Caleb?" he asked. Voice low, controlled. I froze. "Why is he texting you that he misses your voice? And why haven't you answered?" I said nothing. His shoulders sank. He was here, wasn't he? Still silence. He laughed. Bitter. Broken. "I drove across 3 states thinking you were here missing me. I brought you jam Claire." He dropped the phone on the couch, ran a hand through his hair. "Did you sleep with him?" I didn't answer. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "So that's a yes." He didn't scream, didn't throw anything, he just looked away. And somehow that was worse. We sat at the table later, the same old checkered napkins, leftover stew, him with a shot of bourbon, me with water and a knot in my throat. He finally spoke. "I know I left. I know I made this house feel empty, but you were supposed to wait. That's what love does." I met his eyes. "And when was the last time you asked who I was? Not as your wife. Not as someone who did the laundry. Just as a person?" He didn't reply. Tears pressed at my throat, but I didn't let them fall. He looked at me then long and slow. "Is he gone?" "He's waiting," I whispered. He stood, lit a cigarette by the sink. "Then go," he said quietly. "Just don't blame me for it. You were already halfway gone before he got here." When he finally dozed off on the couch, I packed a small bag. Just the gray dress, the thin nightgown, the jar of honey, and the deck of cards. Before I left, I scribbled a note. "You always said the road was your home. I decided mine was warmth, and I can't keep living in the cracks." I left the keys on the shelf, closed the door behind me, stepped into the night. The street was empty, moon high, and the wind felt like something unfamiliar. In my chest, something beat wild, untamed. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was freedom. The bus station in Maple Hollow looked like something out of a postcard someone forgot to send. Faded paint, sleeping dogs, a crooked bench, and an old woman selling boiled peanuts in plastic bags. I bought a ticket to Lansboro. He once told me his grandmother had a cottage there, said it smelled like wet earth in the mornings and that 3 old cherry trees shaded the yard like guardians. I didn't know if he was there, but I needed to see that place, needed to breathe that air. The ride took 5 hours, I stared out the window the whole way, the fields and barns sliding past like forgotten memories. My bag sat on my lap, one dress, one nightgown, honey and cards. It was all I had. And somehow, it felt like enough. When I stepped off the bus, the sky was bruised purple with twilight. The town was quiet. A bakery had just closed, its lights still warm. A church bell rang somewhere in the distance. I found a small inn just off Main Street. The woman at the front desk handed me a real brass key on a block of wood. "You traveling alone, honey?" she asked, not unkindly. "Just passing through," I replied. She nodded like she understood more than she let on. My room was small, smelled of lemon polish and old quilts. I opened the window, let the cool air in. The cherry trees were nowhere in sight. And neither was he. I didn't call, didn't text. Pride, maybe. Hope, definitely. I stared at my phone until 1:43 a.m., then again at 2:27. Nothing. The next morning, I walked to the market. Bought a white blouse with pearl buttons and a pair of secondhand heels. Paired it with my old skirt. Pinned my hair back like I used to in college, tight, precise. Like a woman with a plan, even though everything inside me trembled. I needed him to see I hadn't come broken. I needed me to see it. By noon, I stood outside the inn, ready to admit maybe I'd made a mistake. And that's when I saw him, leaning against the lamppost across the street. Same denim jacket, a sprig of mint in his hand. His eyes locked on mine the moment I stepped into the sun. He didn't smile. Not at first. He just said, "I knew you'd come. Just didn't know when." I swallowed. The air between us shook. "I thought you'd be angry." He nodded once. I was, then stepped forward. "But I'm glad that you chose you. And by doing that, you chose me too." We stood there in the middle of a street that smelled like bread and rain. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a key. I rented a place. Old. Wooden porch. Bad plumbing. But there's a fireplace. And room to begin again. I took the key. "Are you sure?" I whispered. "I'm not perfect," he said. "And neither are you. But if you stay, I'll spend every day making sure you know you're not a shadow anymore." The cottage was older than I expected. The paint peeled like it had shed past lives. The porch creaked under every step. The screen door never closed all the way. But inside it was warm. The kind of warmth that doesn't come from a thermostat. There were mismatched mugs in the cabinet, a chipped table, a cast-iron stove that smoked when lit. And in the backyard, yes, 3 cherry trees, exactly like he said. Caleb had planted herbs by the kitchen window. Rosemary, basil, and mint, of course. We didn't rush into anything. We didn't have to. Some mornings we sat on the floor with coffee and toast, reading aloud from old books we found at the thrift store. Other days we just moved around each other quietly, him fixing the squeaky drawer, me folding laundry, both of us humming the same unspoken song. There were nights we curled up under one quilt, not making love, just holding each other. Touching without demand, kissing without a clock. It wasn't perfect. There were mornings I woke up afraid, still looking over my shoulder, still expecting silence to return like it used to. But he'd always be there, sitting at the table, watching me like I was sunrise. "You don't have to smile if you don't want to," he'd say. "I'll wait." I learned to exhale again, to wear my hair loose, to sit in silence without it feeling like punishment. Once, while we were cleaning out the attic, I found an old radio. Dusty, rusted knob. But when Caleb plugged it in, it worked. The music was low, fuzzy, but it filled the air like memory. He reached for my hand. "Dance with me," he whispered. So we did. Right there between boxes of forgotten things and a half-open window, we swayed in bare feet and laughter. I cried quietly with my head on his shoulder. "What's wrong?" he asked. Nothing, I said. It's just that I never knew peace could feel like this. Soft, gentle, real. Later that night, I wore the lace nightgown again, not to tempt, just to remember who I'd become. He didn't look at me with hunger. He looked at me like reverence, like I was a page he wanted to read slowly. I came home from the market with a paper bag full of fresh peaches and a new bar of lavender soap. The cottage was quiet. At first, I thought Caleb was napping, or out in the garden trimming the mint. But his boots weren't by the door. The radio wasn't playing. Then I saw the note. On the kitchen table. Folded once. My name written in his clean, careful print. Claire. I had to leave. Don't panic. I'll be back. I just have to close something that opened. If I'm not home in 3 days, look for me. But don't worry yet. See. I sat down, the bag of peaches tipping over. The house hummed with stillness, like it was holding its breath. The first night without him, I made chamomile tea and drank it on the porch. Watched the wind move through the cherry trees like fingers through hair. The second night, I didn't sleep. I laid on the couch, wrapped in his flannel shirt, listening to the old clock tick like a heartbeat I didn't trust. The third night, I packed a bag. Just in case. Because I knew I couldn't go back to waiting the way I used to. I wasn't that version of myself anymore. I locked the door, placed the key under the cracked flower pot, and stepped into the dark morning. No plan, no map, just a direction and a name. Caleb. But here's the truth. No one tells you. This story was never about a man. Not Ryan. Not Caleb. It was about the moment I stopped living by someone else's schedule. When I stopped measuring my life in footsteps that weren't mine. When I finally heard the voice inside me, the one I'd ignored for too long, and I followed it, even when it was quiet, even when it was scared. Even now, walking down an unfamiliar road with a canvas bag and an ache in my chest, I know this. I am not a shadow. I am not someone's silence. I am the choice I make every single morning I wake up and decide to keep going. That's what freedom is. Not loud, not clean, but real. Like honey, like breath, like being alive.